The citadel on the western walls of Old Jerusalem was once the palace of Herod the Great, later a fortress for successive conquerors, Romans, Saracens, Crusaders, Turks, all of whom left their mark on its structure. In this century, it was a Jordanian strongpoint in the front line facing Jewish West Jerusalem. But today its warlike role is over. The citadel has become a museum. The healing process, which produced this and many similar changes since the whole city came under Israeli control, is very dear to the heart of Jerusalem's first Jewish mayor. Teddy Kollek has been, in fact, the only mayor since reunification in 1967. His unflagging dedication to peace and the improvement of conditions for Jews, Muslims and Christians alike has made him something of a world figure.
This is a city with many faces, but it is one city. They all love Jerusalem. They all see Jerusalem as their center. So it is one city. They all cooperate. We have maybe difficulties on political grounds. We have no difficulties on municipal grounds in cooperating.
Mr. Kollek is attending a reception in the Liberty Bell Gardens, on the area restored to public use after years as a derelict no man's land. There's no sign now of the barricades, which once cut the city in two, but the mayor is conscious of the deep division that remains.
There certainly is one, but isn't there one in Montreal, for instance, between the French part of Montreal and the English part of Montreal, not to speak about Belfast? Go to Brussels and speak to the Wallons and speak to the Flames and speak to different languages. I could give you dozens and dozens of cities all over the world where you have such dividing lines. Here it is a little stronger, because for 19 years there was a wall which was dividing us, and there were shots going across the wall. So this is gradually, this feeling is gradually diminishing, but you won't find anybody who will want to put that wall up again. But there is still a memory of this. There is also a strong Arab nationalism, and also strong Jewish nationalism, but a strong Arab nationalism which brings Arabs to the conviction that really they are occupied.
Mr. Kollek likes to describe his city as a mosaic rather than a melting pot. A large number of quite distinct units which together form Jerusalem's unique character. The Christians, who enliven the city with such ceremonies as the distribution of holy fire, form 30 separate groups. Most are zealous guardians of their own interests, but they respect any regime that guarantees rights to property and worship. The Jews are the largest community, as they have been since the mid-19th century. They represent 3/4 of the total Jerusalem population of 400,000, but they are by no means a cohesive group. This room, now part of a museum, used to be an important synagogue for Sephardic Jews, basically the name given to those from Muslim countries. In bygone centuries, they were often the most prominent Jews in the city, but modern Israel put them at a disadvantage. They couldn't compete with the educational and technical abilities of the Ashkenazim, the Jews from Europe and America. This hasn't been the only cause of conflict. There have also been bitter clashes between religious and non-religious Jews. But the deepest division in the United City is the one that separates Jews from people like Ibrahim Mata, a resident of Israel who calls himself a Palestinian.
Palestinians, whether Christians or Muslims, are unwanted. And all plans at the moment are to make the Palestinians, even in East Jerusalem, a minority. At this point, there are 70,000 Israelis already living in East Jerusalem, when there were none prior to 67. And there are 110,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. The plan is that in 3-4 years, they'll have a Jewish majority even in East Jerusalem. So their plans are to turn Jerusalem an exclusive Jewish city.
East Jerusalem was proclaimed an irrevocable part of Israel after its capture in 1967. The reaffirmation of this decision in 1980 caused many countries to move their embassies to Tel Aviv in protest. By then, Jerusalem had already become the largest and fastest growing city in the country. The annexation made 100,000 Palestinians residents of the Israeli capital. Most still remain citizens of Jordan, and many have strong connections with neighboring Arab states. They take no official part in national politics, although they vote in municipal elections. According to the mayor, they represent the sort of social problem that's not confined to this city.
Well, let me say this. You have a problem of color in New York. I think we'll solve our problem before you solve the problem of the black and white in the United States. I don't know why the whole world is so impatient. Why do we have to solve this immediately? Have you solved the problem of your aboriginals in Australia so easily? It's already, you have a solution already? And there you are patient, and I understand that. Have the South Africans solved their problem? And there everybody, not everybody, but there certainly the South Africans are patient over it. Here you see from year to year progress, that people have more contact, that there is no violence. So it took 2,000 years for the Jews to come back here. Give us a couple of 100 years to solve the problems.
It was the other way round when Muslims ruled the city. In 1858, an American observer wrote of the Jews, "The stones should weep to see the grinding oppression under which they groan." He added that a Jew had even been killed for approaching the Holy Sepulchre. Conditions had greatly improved by the time these pictures were taken in 1913, near the end of 4 centuries of Turkish rule. The enfeebled administration had been in no position to resist changes, and the growing Zionist movement had already imported immigrants and a new sense of Jewish pride. While worshippers at the Western Wall were still confined to the only space the Turkish authorities permitted, work to enlarge the Jewish claim on Palestine gained momentum elsewhere. But Jews still had a long wait for nationhood, through the turmoil of the British Mandate and the horror of the Second World War. Eventually, in 1947, the General Assembly of the newly formed United Nations met for an historic decision. It was to vote on the partition of Palestine. Half a world away, the people most directly concerned stayed by their radios.
The resolution of the Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes.
When the news at last came through, the Jewish communities went wild. Even in Jerusalem, which the United Nations had voted to place under international control, they took over the streets in celebration. For once, America and Russia had agreed. So had the required 2/3 majority of the General Assembly. Palestine was to be divided, and a Jewish state would be born. But not if the Arabs could help it. Forces from every adjoining country converged to crush Israeli independence the moment it was declared in 1948. In theory, there should have been no contest. The Arabs were far more numerous. They had the support of regular armies with access to modern weapons. The Jews, on the other hand, had been unable to acquire arms legally as they'd not been officially a nation. They had trouble controlling some of the more idiosyncratic organizations within their own independence movement. But the Arabs also had their problems with divided leadership and undisciplined irregulars. And they couldn't match the resolve of an enemy infused with a desperate determination. Since 1948, Jewish and Arab soldiers have fought 3 major wars. And with the sole exception of Egypt, peace treaties have yet to be signed. In fact, Israel has never known a time when its right to exist wasn't in question. So it maintains its readiness with massive expenditure on arms and defense. Something like a quarter of its gross national product is swallowed up to keep the Israel Defense Force a formidable opponent. Nearly every Israeli does military service. The main exceptions are those with strong religious views. At 18, men serve 3 years and thereafter become reservists until they reach 55. Single women do 20 months and are liable for reserve service up to the age of 35. Few of them get to drive a Centurion tank, but Einat Laor, a 20-year-old native of Jerusalem, is an exception. She'd like to study economics once she's no longer involved with the mechanics of war. Rana Nashashibi is roughly the same age as Einat, and she also lives in Jerusalem. But there's no military service for her. Rana is a Palestinian. She has a job as a registrar and a degree in business studies. She feels trapped in a system dominated by the reality of Israeli power.
You had this kind of problem because you wanted to work with your own field because you liked it, but then you end up working as a librarian because that was the only work you found at that stage. And now you wanted to go abroad and study, but you didn't have the opportunity to do it. I mean, it really makes you frustrated to know that you're doing something you don't like. And it makes you, I mean, kind of angry or confused all the time because you're not doing the thing you want.
Those particular frustrations don't apply in Einat Laor's world. Instead, there are obligations to the defense of a homeland under continual threat. Instructing recruits to the Armored Corps on the finer points of tank design is not Einat's chosen career, but it's part of the price she has to accept to secure her way of life. The situation is not without its ironies. In the street, Rana Nashashibi and her friends could easily be mistaken for young Israelis. There's nothing the casual observer could glean from either their dress or their interests to set them apart. But Palestinian girls don't get to demonstrate tank guns, at least not when the Israelis are in charge. Einat Loor, the daughter of a Romanian immigrant, has been taught skills and given responsibilities that are more than an acknowledgement of her own aptitude. They're also a reflection of her membership of what constitutes the ruling class. Palestinians complain of being an occupied people. This doesn't necessarily mean they are poor or downtrodden. Many have prospered under Israeli rule, despite high inflation and other economic woes. But there remains a deep-seated malaise and a feeling that Palestinian affairs are in unsympathetic hands. The basic problem is one of the oldest reasons for human conflict, the claims of separate peoples on one piece of land. Rana Nashashibi isn't alone in believing that fundamental changes must be made.
Well, I think the whole political and economic situation has to change so that our life could change here. We can't, we can't feel there's any hope for change except if there was a complete political change in the West Bank or Jerusalem. There must be some kind of settlement for the Palestinians, and that is, as we believe that we want to have a Palestinian state around the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where the Palestinians can have the opportunity to get a Palestinian identity and to have the right to, they must have the right to decide what they want.
Now, as I said before, they are not particularly happy with us. They don't want the PLO. They don't want the Hashemites or King Hussein. So they're in a very difficult situation because they don't know really what the solution may be, but they hope that one day from Allah, or with the help of the Russians, or with the help of the United Nations, or with the help of pestilence or so, a solution will be found and will disappear.
The Jews, of course, have no intention of disappearing. As one of her country's soldiers, Einat Loor has no doubt about that aspect of the future. There's no question to her mind that Israel is here to stay. Her own future is a little less certain. When she leaves the army, she hopes to join her boyfriend at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and take a degree in economics. Out of uniform and enjoying a little home leave in Jerusalem, Einat sheds the role of tank instructor and becomes, once more, a fairly typical young city dweller. Einat probably has a lot in common with Rana Nashashibi. Similar age, good education, perhaps the same sort of outside interests. In another time and another place, they could even be friends. But in Jerusalem, they're on opposite sides of a fundamental rift. The open-air cafes of Ben Yehuda Street, where Einat and her boyfriend chat to some friends, are little more than a kilometer from the Arab cafes of Saladin Street. But the cultural and political distance is much greater. Einat says, of course she would be interested in having Palestinian friends if the interest was reciprocal. The fact is, she knows very little of the Palestinians, and they know very little of her. By long tradition, the many groups that comprise Jerusalem like to keep to themselves. This is what makes the mosaic pattern the mayor refers to when he speaks of the special quality of his city. But some easier form of accommodation between the two major groups would seem necessary if young people like Einat and her friend Moshe Atik are to see out their Jerusalem days in peaceful security. The mayor, Mr. Kolak, does what he can, although his period in office hasn't been to the liking of many Palestinians.
Since Teddy Kollek became mayor, I have estimated that Palestinians have been impoverished by at least $1 billion. So how can we talk of benefits? As you know, they have confiscated 12,000 acres of most expensive real estate land in East Jerusalem to build on it exclusive Jewish settlements. They have built, the Israeli municipality together with the housing ministry have built over 40,000 apartments in the east side of Jerusalem and the next side exclusively for the Jewish Israelis. We as Palestinians, whether we are Christians or Muslims, have no right to any of these apartments. So I don't see any benefits from their occupation. On the contrary, as I told you, we have been impoverished.
Jerusalem has so far avoided the unhappy fate of Belfast or Beirut, but still Palestinians like Ibrahim Matar aren't optimistic.
I don't see that by the year 2000, Jerusalem will be a city of peace, because rather than seeing tolerance, we are seeing intolerance for the national rights of another people who are living in the city, Palestinians. And we are seeing a drive to turn Jerusalem into an exclusive Jewish city rather than a city open for the whole world. And as such, it will be very hard to see Jerusalem really a city of peace 20 years from now.
Mayor Teddy Kolak certainly doesn't concede many of the Palestinian complaints. He's worked hard to make an even-handed administration which treats everyone's concerns with equal attention. And he has confidence in the long-term future of the remarkable city over which he presides.
Well, mainly for the fact that we established a possibility for everybody to live together in the city. And that it's a free and open city. And while we haven't solved all the solutions, haven't solved all the problems, and haven't found all the solutions, certainly it's a better city than when the war divided it. And I hope it will remain that way.
Mr. Kolak's hopes are supported by at least one name respected by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. David, the poet king, wrote a special psalm for his city. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee.
They